The moment Dalton Garrett saw the crumpled figure in the snow, his heart stopped in a way that had nothing to do with the brutal Wyoming cold cutting through his coat. She was barely visible against the white landscape, a dark smudge against pristine powder, and for a terrible second, he thought she might already be dead. His chestnut mare sensed his sudden tension and quickened her pace without prompting, carrying him across the frozen trail toward what he prayed was still a living soul. When he dropped from the saddle and fell to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her pale face, her eyelids fluttered open just enough to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds, and something deep in his chest shifted in a way that felt like recognition. Without thinking, without knowing why, he whispered words that came from somewhere beyond conscious thought. "I've been waiting for you." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ice crystals clung to her dark lashes, and her skin felt like marble beneath his rough fingers. Dalton had seen men freeze to death on cattle drives, knew exactly how little time she had left before the cold claimed her permanently. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shaking frame, then lifted her into his arms with more gentleness than he knew he possessed. She weighed almost nothing, this mysterious woman who had appeared on a February trail in 1873 like something from a fever dream. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair as he carried her to his horse. "Just stay with me." Getting her into the saddle took effort she could not provide. Her body was limp and unresponsive, muscles locked from the cold. Dalton mounted behind her and pulled her back against his chest, wrapping both arms around her middle to keep her upright. His coat engulfed her small frame, and he tucked her head beneath his chin, using his own body heat to begin the slow process of warming her. The mare turned homeward without needing direction, following the trail back toward the ranch that Dalton had built with his own hands over the past 5 years. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as they rode, snow coming down in thick sheets that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Dalton bent over the woman in his arms, shielding her from the worst of it, and urged his horse faster. His ranch was still 3 miles away, and darkness was falling quickly. The wind howled across the open prairie like a living thing, trying to tear them from the saddle. She stirred against him once, a small sound of distress escaping her blue-tinged lips. Dalton tightened his hold and spoke to her steadily, his voice rough from disuse. He had lived alone for 2 years now, ever since his younger brother had headed to California seeking gold. Before that, conversations had been sparse anyway. Words did not come easily to Dalton Garrett. But now they flowed like water. "Not far now. Got a fire waiting. Got hot coffee and blankets. You're going to be just fine. I promise you're going to be fine." He had no business making such promises. He had no idea who she was or what had brought her out alone into a Wyoming winter. But something about finding her felt inevitable. Like every decision he had made in his 32 years, had been leading him to this exact moment on this frozen trail. The lights of his ranch house appeared through the snow like a miracle. Dalton had left a lantern burning in the window that morning, a habit from his childhood when his mother had always kept a light for his father. He had never quite broken himself of it, even though there was no one to come home to anymore. Tonight he was grateful for the beacon guiding them through the storm. He dismounted awkwardly with the woman still in his arms and kicked open the front door. The inside of the house was barely warmer than outside since the fire had burned down to embers. Dalton carried his burden to the bedroom and laid her on his bed, then ran back to stoke the fire and add fresh logs. Only when flames were roaring in the stone fireplace did he return to her. Her eyes were closed again, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Dalton's hands shook as he began removing her wet clothes. There was nothing improper in his thoughts, only desperate urgency. Wet clothing would kill her as surely as leaving her in the snow. He peeled away a thin coat that would not have kept anyone warm, a dress that had seen better days, cotton undergarments soaked through to her skin. He tried not to look at her body as he worked, tried to maintain some sense of propriety even as he stripped her bare. When she lay naked on his bed, he could see the full extent of her condition. Her skin was mottled with white patches of frostbite on her fingers and toes. Her collarbone stood out starkly, and her ribs were visible beneath pale skin. She had not just been freezing, she had been starving. Dalton felt anger rise hot in his throat at whoever had let this happen to her. He grabbed every blanket in the house and piled them over her, then dragged the mattress closer to the fireplace with her still on it. He had heard that you were supposed to warm someone slowly after severe cold, not too fast or their heart might stop. He checked her pulse at her wrist and found it thready and weak, but still there. For the next hour, Dalton worked with single-minded focus. He heated water and used cloths to gently warm her extremities. He prepared broth from dried beef, keeping it thin and mild. He checked her pulse every few minutes and watched the barely perceptible rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Slowly, painfully slowly, color began returning to her face. The deathly white gave way to pale cream, then the faintest hint of pink. When her eyes finally opened fully, Dalton was sitting beside the bed with a cup of warm broth. She stared at him for a long moment, confusion and fear warring in her gray eyes. He held very still, letting her take in her surroundings, letting her see that she was safe. "You're in my home," he said quietly. "I found you on the trail. You were freezing. I brought you back here." Her lips moved and a whisper emerged, so soft he had to lean closer to hear. "Where?" "About 15 miles outside of Laramie, Wyoming. February 10th, 1873. You're safe now." Something in her face crumpled and tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. Dalton reached out instinctively and brushed them away with his thumb. She did not flinch from his touch. "Can you drink something?" he asked. "Just a little broth. You need to get warm from the inside." She managed a small nod. Dalton helped her sit up, keeping the blankets wrapped around her shoulders, and held the cup to her lips. She took tiny sips, her hands trembling too badly to hold it herself. After a few swallows, she turned her head away and he set the cup aside. "What's your name?" he asked. For a moment he thought she would not answer. Then, "Sarah Vaughn. I'm Dalton Garrett. This is my ranch, the Double G. How did you end up out on that trail alone?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "The stagecoach. They made me get off." Dalton felt his jaw tighten. "Why would they do that? I couldn't pay. I had money when I left Council Bluffs, Iowa, but someone stole my bag in Cheyenne. I've been trying to get to my aunt in California. She's the only family I have left. The driver said if I couldn't pay, I had to walk. We were supposed to be near a town, but I never found one. I just kept walking, and then the snow started and I couldn't feel my feet anymore, and I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought I was going to die out there." Dalton had heard stories of unscrupulous stage drivers abandoning passengers, but experiencing such cruelty firsthand filled him with cold fury. "Do you remember the company? The driver's name?" Sarah shook her head weakly. "I just remember being so cold, and then you were there. You said something to me, but I thought I was dreaming." He remembered his own words, those strange words that had come from nowhere. "I've been waiting for you." Heat crept up his neck, but he did not look away from her. "You weren't dreaming. I said that. I don't know why." Something shifted in her expression, some of the fear easing. "It was a nice thing to hear. Right then, I mean. It made me feel less alone." "You're not alone anymore," Dalton said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "You can stay here as long as you need. Until you're well. Until spring if necessary. I couldn't impose like that. You don't even know me. I know you need help and I can provide it. That's enough." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. Dalton bore the scrutiny, letting her see whatever she needed to see. He was not a complicated man. He worked hard, kept his word, and tried to do right by people. He had no family left in Wyoming, no close friends, nothing but his cattle and his land and the simple life he had built. But looking at this woman wrapped in his blankets, her gray eyes searching his face, he felt the first stirrings of something he had thought long dead. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "I'll repay you somehow. When I'm better, I can work. I can cook and clean. I'm good with horses, too. We'll worry about that later. Right now, you need to rest and get your strength back." He helped her lie down again and tucked the blankets around her. She was asleep before he left the room, exhaustion pulling her under. Dalton stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, before forcing himself to turn away. The storm raged outside for 2 more days. Dalton tended to his livestock in between caring for Sarah, fighting through hip-deep snow to reach the barn where his cattle and horses sheltered. He lost track of how many times he checked on her that first night, unable to sleep for fear she might take a turn. But she remained stable, her breathing evening out, color slowly returning to her cheeks. On the second day, she was able to sit up and eat more solid food. Dalton had made eggs and bacon, and she consumed them with an appetite that told him exactly how long it had been since her last real meal. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table, nursing his coffee and watching her eat. "Tell me about Council Bluffs," he said. "That's a long way from here." Sarah finished chewing before answering. "I lived there my whole life. My parents had a farm outside of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours." Her voice went soft. "They both died of fever last autumn, within 3 days of each other. After that, I had nothing. The bank took the farm for debts I didn't know existed. My Aunt Emma wrote and said I could come stay with her in Sacramento. She sent money for the stage fare, but like I said, it was stolen. I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you. They were good people." She looked down at her plate. "I keep thinking if I had been more careful, if I had hidden the money better, none of this would have happened. It's not your fault someone stole from you, and it's not your fault that driver left you in the middle of nowhere. I know. But knowing something and feeling it are different things." Dalton understood that better than she knew. After his parents died in a fire and his brother left for California, he had spent months blaming himself for not being there, for not somehow preventing it. Logic had nothing to do with guilt. Over the following days, Sarah grew stronger. The frostbite on her fingers and toes proved less severe than Dalton had feared. She would keep all her digits, though she said they ached terribly, as feeling returned. He made poultices from herbs his mother had taught him about years ago, treatments passed down from her Arapaho mother. Sarah accepted his ministrations with quiet gratitude, and Dalton found himself looking forward to those moments when he could sit beside her and tend to her injuries. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke and weak sunlight filtered through the windows. Sarah insisted on getting up despite Dalton's protests. He had given her some of his clothes to wear since her dress had been ruined beyond repair. She looked almost comical in his shirt and pants, the fabric hanging loose on her slender frame, but she held her head high as she walked slowly around the small house. "It's a good home," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table he had built. "You made all this yourself." "Most of it. Bought some things in town, but I prefer to work with my hands when I can. It shows. Everything is so solid and well made." She paused by the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "How much land do you have?" 500 acres. Not as much as some of the big ranchers, but enough for me and my cattle. You run it alone. I do now. Had a hired hand for a while, but he moved on last spring. It's just me and the livestock. Sarah turned to face him, leaning against the window frame. That sounds lonely. Dalton shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. I'm used to it. Being used to something doesn't make it less lonely. He had no answer for that. The truth was she was right. He had grown so accustomed to solitude that he had stopped noticing it. But having another person in his home, hearing another voice, watching Sarah move through the rooms, made him realize how much he had been missing without knowing it. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting. "Did you have someone back in Council Bluffs? Someone you left behind?" A sad smile crossed her face. "There was a man who wanted to court me, Ben Harrison. He worked at the general store, but I didn't feel anything for him, not the way I should have. After my parents died, he asked me to marry him. Said he would take care of everything, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't marry someone just for security when there was no love between us. That took courage, or foolishness. I'd be sitting by a warm fire right now if I had said yes. But you'd be miserable. Maybe, probably." She pushed away from the window and walked toward him. "Can I ask you something? Those words you said when you found me, about waiting for me. Did you mean them, or was it just something to say?" Dalton met her eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted his thoughts since that first moment. "I don't know. I've never said anything like that before to anyone. It just came out, like something I'd been holding inside without knowing it." Sarah nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it a lot, about how I ended up on that trail at that exact moment. About how you happened to be riding by right then. If any of it had been different, even by minutes, I'd be dead. It feels like something more than coincidence." Maybe it was. They stood there in the winter light filtering through his window, close enough to touch but not touching, and Dalton felt the air between them charged with possibility. Sarah's hair had dried into soft waves around her face, and there was color in her cheeks now, life returning to her features. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in a showy way, but in something quieter, something that grew more apparent the longer he looked. The moment stretched, and then Sarah stepped back, breaking the tension. "I should help with something. Cooking or cleaning. I can't just sit idle while you do everything. You're still recovering. I feel fine. A little weak, but fine. Please let me help. I need to feel useful." Dalton relented because he understood that need. They fell into an easy rhythm over the next week. Sarah took over the cooking, preparing meals that were far better than anything Dalton had managed on his own. She cleaned the house and mended his clothes where they had torn. In return, Dalton taught her about the ranch, showed her how to care for the cattle in winter, let her help in the barn with the horses. She proved to be as good with animals as she had claimed. His mare, usually skittish with strangers, warmed to Sarah immediately. Dalton watched from the barn door as she brushed the horse's coat and spoke to her in a low, soothing voice. The sight did something to his heart that he could not quite name. They talked while they worked. Sarah told him about growing up on the farm, about helping her father with the spring planting and her mother with the garden. She spoke about the books she had read, borrowed from a neighbor who had an extensive library. She had wanted to be a teacher once, she confessed, but there had never been money for more schooling. Dalton found himself sharing things he had not spoken about in years. He told her about his brother Jacob, who had been restless and ambitious in ways Dalton never was. About how they had been close as children but had grown apart as adults, wanting different things from life. He talked about his parents, about the fire that had taken them and the guilt he still carried. "You couldn't have known," Sarah said gently. "You couldn't have prevented it. I know. But like you said, knowing and feeling are different things." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact, and the warmth of her palm against his sent electricity through his entire body. "Then I'll tell you what you told me. It wasn't your fault, and I'll keep telling you until you believe it." February turned to March, and the snow began to melt, revealing the brown prairie grass beneath. The days grew longer and slightly warmer. Sarah's strength returned fully, and she began venturing outside more, helping Dalton with the outdoor work. They fixed fences together and moved cattle to fresh grazing areas. They rode out to check the property lines, Sarah on his mare and Dalton on a gelding. During one of these rides, they crested a hill and stopped to look out over the valley below. The land stretched in rolling waves as far as the eye could see, beautiful in its vastness and emptiness. "I can see why you love it here," Sarah said. "It's like the whole world is open and waiting." "That's exactly it. When I first came out here after my parents died, I felt like I could finally breathe, like I had room to be myself without anyone expecting things from me." "Do I make you feel that way, like someone is expecting things?" Dalton turned in his saddle to look at her. "No. You make me feel the opposite, like I can be exactly who I am and that's enough." Color rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "You make me feel the same way. I've never felt so comfortable with another person, like I don't have to pretend or hide parts of myself." "What parts would you hide?" "The parts that want more than I was supposed to want. The parts that dreamed too big for a farm girl from Iowa. The parts that didn't want to marry Ben Harrison and settle for a safe, predictable life. Those aren't parts to hide. Those are the best parts." Sarah smiled, soft and genuine. "I think so too, but not everyone would agree." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. The connection that had been building since that first moment on the trail was becoming harder to ignore. Dalton caught himself watching Sarah more often, noticing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way she laughed at his clumsy jokes, the way she fit into his life like she had always been there. One evening in mid-March after dinner, they sat by the fire together. Sarah was mending one of Dalton's shirts, and he was working on a leather bridle that needed repair. The domesticity of the scene struck him suddenly. This was what life could be like. Not lonely days and silent nights, but shared work and quiet companionship. "Sarah," he said, setting aside the bridle, "can I ask you something?" She looked up from her sewing. "Of course. You still want to go to California, to your aunt?" Her hand stilled on the fabric. "I've been thinking about that a lot. When I left Council Bluffs, California felt like my only option, the only place I had to go, but now—" She trailed off, not finishing the thought. "But now," Dalton prompted, his heart beating faster. "Now I'm not sure what I want. I mean, I should still go. I can't stay here forever, imposing on your hospitality." "What if you weren't imposing? What if I wanted you to stay?" Sarah set down the shirt and turned to face him fully. "Dalton, what are you saying?" He had never been good with words, had never been the kind of man who could make pretty speeches. But he knew what was in his heart, and he knew he had to try. "I'm saying that finding you on that trail was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm saying that these past few weeks, having you here, have been the happiest I can remember. I'm saying that when I think about you leaving, it feels like losing something essential." "I feel the same way," she whispered. "But what does that mean? What are we supposed to do about it?" Dalton stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt in front of her chair so they were at eye level. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know this is fast and probably crazy, but I also know that I haven't felt this sure about anything in my entire life." He took both her hands in his. "Stay with me, Sarah. Not as a guest or a hired hand. Stay with me as my wife." Her eyes widened and tears gathered on her lashes. "You want to marry me?" "I do. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, raise cattle, maybe have children someday if you want them. I want to grow old with you. I know I'm not much. I'm just a rancher with more land than sense and not much in the way of pretty words. But I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." A tear spilled down her cheek and Dalton reached up to wipe it away, just as he had that first day. "You are everything," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You're kind and strong, and you saved my life in more ways than one. I was so lost before you found me, not just on that trail, but in every way that matters. And yes, this is fast and maybe crazy, but I don't care. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." Dalton felt his chest expand with something too big to contain. He stood and pulled Sarah up with him, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. She pressed her face against his shoulder and he felt her tears soak through his shirt. "I've been waiting for you," he murmured into her hair, repeating those first words. "I think I've been waiting my whole life." "I was so scared that day," Sarah said. "But even through the fear, when I heard your voice, I felt safe. I felt like I was finally where I was supposed to be." Dalton pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. Her gray eyes were luminous in the firelight, filled with emotion that mirrored his own. He had kissed exactly 3 women in his life, awkward encounters that had left him feeling more confused than anything else. But when he lowered his mouth to Sarah's, there was nothing awkward about it. The kiss was gentle and sweet and felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah laughed softly. "I've never been kissed like that. Neither have I." "Good. I want to be your first for everything that matters." They stood wrapped in each other's arms while the fire crackled beside them and the wind whispered outside. Eventually, they pulled apart enough to sit back down, but this time Sarah settled on Dalton's lap, her head on his shoulder, his arms around her waist. "When should we get married?" she asked. "Soon. As soon as we can get to town and find a preacher, unless you want something bigger, with people in a fancy dress." Sarah shook her head. "I just want you. Everything else is extra. Tomorrow, then. We'll ride into Laramie tomorrow and make this official." "Tomorrow," she agreed, and kissed him again. They sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, stealing kisses and making quiet plans. Dalton could not stop touching her, running his hands over her arms and back, marveling that she was real and here and saying yes to a future with him. Sarah seemed equally unable to keep her hands still, tracing the line of his jaw, threading her fingers through his hair. When they finally went to their separate rooms that night, Dalton lay awake for hours, too filled with joy to sleep. Through the thin wall he could hear Sarah moving around, could picture her in his bed, could imagine a future where they shared that bed every night. The thought sent heat through him, but also a deep sense of rightness. This was meant to be. Everything had led to this moment. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They prepared for the journey to town with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sarah wore her one dress, the spare from her bag that had not been ruined, though it was wrinkled and plain. Dalton wished he could give her silk and lace, wished he could offer her a wedding like she deserved. "You look beautiful," he said as she emerged from the bedroom. She smiled and touched the worn fabric self-consciously. "I look like exactly what I am, a farm girl in a plain dress." "No. You look like the woman I'm going to marry, like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ride to Laramie took most of the morning. They talked the whole way, making plans for the ranch, discussing where they might build additions to the house if children came along. Sarah wanted a garden in the spring, vegetables and flowers both. Dalton promised to fence off an area near the house where the cattle could not trample it. Laramie was not a large town, but it had what they needed. They found the church easily enough, a white wooden building with a small steeple. The Reverend was an older man with kind eyes who did not ask too many questions when Dalton explained their situation. He agreed to marry them that afternoon if they could find witnesses. Dalton led Sarah to the general store first. "Pick out some fabric," he said. "Something nice. We'll find a seamstress to make you a proper dress." "Dalton, that's not necessary. We don't have time anyway." "Then pick something for later, for nice occasions. Please let me do this." Sarah relented, selecting a bolt of blue cloth that matched her eyes, though she insisted it was too extravagant. Dalton also bought her a simple gold ring, the best the store had to offer, and a new coat to replace the one that had been ruined. While the storekeeper wrapped their purchases, his wife overheard what was happening. "You're getting married today?" she asked, her round face lighting up. "How wonderful! I'll be your witness if you need one, and my husband too. We love a good wedding." And so it was that an hour later, Dalton Garrett and Sarah Vaughn stood before Reverend Thomas in the small Laramie church, with Mr. and Mrs. Henderson standing witness. Sarah held a small bunch of dried flowers that Mrs. Henderson had produced from somewhere. Dalton held Sarah's hand like a lifeline. The ceremony was simple and brief. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage. He asked if they took each other freely and without reservation. Their answers rang out clear and strong in the quiet church. "I do. I do." Dalton slipped the gold ring onto Sarah's finger, his hands shaking slightly. It fit perfectly, catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, when he said Dalton could kiss his bride, time seemed to stop. Dalton cupped Sarah's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and promise he could pour into the gesture. Mrs. Henderson cried happily, and her husband clapped Dalton on the back. The Reverend shook their hands and wished them well. They signed the certificate, and Dalton folded it carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. Proof that this was real, that Sarah was truly his wife. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a celebration meal of steak and potatoes. The Hendersons joined them, regaling them with stories of their own wedding 30 years prior. Mrs. Henderson insisted on giving Sarah some of her mother's recipes, written in a careful hand on yellowing paper. "Every marriage needs good food," she declared. "And every bride needs to know she's not alone. You come visit us anytime, dear. We're just down the street from the general store." Sarah hugged the older woman, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything, for being there today. It was our pleasure, sweetheart. You take care of each other now." The ride back to the ranch took place under a sky full of stars. Sarah rode in front of Dalton on his gelding, his arms around her waist, her back against his chest. They did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable, full of contentment. When they reached the house, Dalton dismounted first and then lifted Sarah down. Instead of setting her on her feet, he kept her in his arms and carried her across the threshold. She laughed in surprise, her arms around his neck. "What are you doing? It's tradition." "Carrying the bride over the threshold. Supposed to be good luck. I think we've had all the luck we could possibly need." Dalton set her down gently in front of the fire, which he had banked before leaving that morning. He added fresh logs, and the flames leaped up, casting warm light through the room. When he turned back, Sarah was watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. "Terrified," he admitted. "I don't want to do anything wrong. Don't want to hurt you or disappoint you." Sarah crossed to him and took his hands. "You could never disappoint me. We'll figure this out together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Figuring things out together." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and felt her melt against him. They stood wrapped together while the fire crackled and the night deepened around them. When they finally made their way to the bedroom, to the bed they would now share, There was nervousness, but also joy, tenderness, but also passion. They came together in the darkness with whispered words and gentle touches, learning each other, loving each other. Afterwards, Sarah lay in the circle of Dalton's arms, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know it's fast, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Dalton said, the words feeling both foreign and completely natural. "From the moment I saw you in the snow, I think I've loved you." They fell asleep tangled together, husband and wife, two people who had found each other against all odds. The weeks that followed their wedding were among the happiest of Dalton's life. Spring arrived in earnest, melting the last of the snow and bringing green shoots pushing up through the brown earth. Sarah threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She helped with the cattle, worked alongside Dalton to repair winter damage to the fences and buildings, and began planning her garden. Dalton taught her to rope and brand, skills she picked up quickly despite never having done them before. She taught him to cook beyond basic survival meals, filling their home with the sense of baking bread and roasting meat. They worked from dawn until dusk and fell into bed exhausted but happy, wrapped in each other's arms. In late April, Dalton hired 2 ranch hands to help with the spring roundup. Tom and Billy were brothers in their early 20s, hard workers who kept to themselves. They built a small bunkhouse near the barn and ate their meals with Dalton and Sarah in the main house. At first, Dalton worried about having other men around, worried they might look at Sarah in ways they should not. But his wife handled herself with confidence and competence, treating the men like the employees they were. They respected her in turn, following her instructions about meals and schedules without question. The roundup was hard work. They spent long days on horseback, gathering cattle that had scattered over the winter, branding calves, separating animals for sale. Sarah proved herself capable of keeping up with the men, though Dalton worried constantly about her safety. She laughed at his hovering, insisting she was fine, but she also touched his arm gently and kissed his cheek, understanding his concern came from love. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, spectacular in a way that never got old. Sarah leaned against Dalton's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "I never imagined my life could be like this," she said. "So full and happy. When I was freezing on that trail, I thought my story was over, but it was really just beginning." "Our story was just beginning," Dalton corrected, wrapping his arm around her. "I can't imagine my life without you now. Don't want to imagine it." "Good. Because you're stuck with me. Best thing I've ever been stuck with." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. Inside the house, Tom and Billy were finishing the dinner dishes, their quiet conversation drifting through the open windows. The cattle lowed in the distance and night birds began their evening songs. "Dalton," Sarah said after a while, "do you ever think about having children?" His heart jumped at the question. "I do you, all the time lately. I think about a little boy with your eyes. Or a little girl with your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak? You're the one who insisted on helping with that fence last week even though you had a cold. That's different. That was being helpful. That was being stubborn." Sarah laughed and poked him in the ribs. "Fine. Then I hope our children get stubborn from both of us. They'll be unstoppable." Terrifying thought. But Dalton was smiling. "I'd love to have children with you, as many as you want. Fill this house with noise and chaos. Maybe we should start with one and see how we manage." "Sounds like a plan." In early May, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She did not mention it right away, not wanting to get Dalton's hopes up in case she was wrong. But when another week passed and then 2, she knew. She waited until they were alone one evening, the ranch hands having gone to town, before telling him, "Dalton, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the account books he had been studying, immediately attentive to the tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Better than fine." She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment Dalton just stared at her, not comprehending. Then understanding dawned and his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. He stood up so fast his chair fell over backwards, pulling Sarah into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby. We're having a baby, are you sure?" "I'm sure. I've missed 2 cycles now and I've been feeling queasy in the mornings, and I just know I can feel it." Dalton set her down carefully as if she might break. "When? When will the baby come?" "I think late December or early January, after the new year." "That's perfect. We'll be snowed in anyway, nowhere to go, nothing to do but take care of you and the baby." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I can't believe it. We're going to be parents." Sarah laughed, giddy with his joy. "We are. Are you happy?" "Happy? Sarah, I'm beyond happy. I don't even have words for what I am." He knelt in front of her and pressed his ear to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I already love you more than I knew possible." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she looked down at her husband, at this man who had saved her life and given her everything she never knew she wanted. "You're going to be such a good father." "I'm going to try. I'm going to give this child everything I never had, love and security and a home that's always safe." They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and cradles and all the things they would need. Dalton insisted Sarah stop doing the harder ranch work, wanted her to take it easy. She argued that she was pregnant, not fragile, but eventually agreed to let him handle the heavy lifting. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Sarah's stomach grew round and Dalton could not keep his hands off her, constantly touching her belly, marveling at the life growing inside. When the baby started kicking, he pressed his palm against her stomach for hours, feeling the tiny movements. "Strong kicks," he said one night. "Going to be a fighter, this one." "Just like us," Sarah agreed. They prepared the second bedroom for the baby, Dalton building a cradle from oak wood and Sarah sewing blankets and tiny clothes. Mrs. Henderson visited twice, bringing supplies and advice. She had raised 6 children of her own and was full of practical wisdom. "Don't listen to anyone who says you need to do things a certain way," she told Sarah. "Every baby is different, every mother too. You'll figure out what works for you." As autumn arrived and Sarah entered her final months, Dalton became increasingly protective. He barely wanted to let her out of his sight, worried something would go wrong when he was not there. Sarah tolerated his hovering with patience and humor, understanding it came from love and fear in equal measure. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she assured him repeatedly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We're built for this." "I know. But you're my whole world, Sarah. You and this baby. If something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do." "Nothing is going to happen. We're both going to be fine, and you're going to be a father, and we're going to raise this child together and grow old watching them grow up." The first real snow fell in early December, coating the ranch in white. Dalton looked at the landscape and thought back to that day nearly a year ago when he had found Sarah freezing on the trail. So much had changed in such a short time. His whole life had transformed from lonely isolation to abundant joy. On January 3, 1874, Sarah went into labor. It started in the early morning hours, waking her with cramping pains. She touched Dalton's shoulder and said calmly, "It's time." He was up in an instant, suddenly wide awake and terrified. They had sent for the doctor a week ago, and he was staying at the hotel in town, ready to come at a moment's notice. Dalton rode through the pre-dawn darkness like the devil was chasing him, pounded on the doctor's door, and had him back at the ranch within an hour. Dr. Mitchell was an older man with steady hands and a calm demeanor. He examined Sarah and pronounced everything normal, then settled in to wait. Labor could take hours or even days with a first baby, he explained. All they could do was be patient. Dalton was anything but patient. He paced the house like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. Sarah labored through the day, her pains growing stronger and closer together. Dalton held her hand when she would let him, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement. "You're doing so well," he told her. "So strong, I'm so proud of you." "Easy for you to say," she gasped between contractions. "You're not the one being torn apart." "I wish I could do this for you. I'd trade places in a heartbeat. I know you would. That's why I love you." As evening fell and lamps were lit throughout the house, Sarah's contractions intensified. Dr. Mitchell examined her again and nodded with satisfaction. "Almost there. When the next pain comes, I want you to push." What followed was the longest hour of Dalton's life. He stood behind Sarah, supporting her while she pushed, feeling utterly helpless. Her screams tore through him, but he held on, murmuring constant encouragement even though he did not know if she could hear him. And then, just when he thought he could not bear another moment, a new sound filled the room. A baby's cry, sharp and indignant and absolutely perfect. "Doctor." Mitchell held up a squirming infant covered in blood and fluid. "It's a boy," he announced. "A healthy baby boy." Dalton stared at his son, this tiny person who had not existed moments ago, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Sarah's arms. She was crying and laughing at the same time, looking down at their son with wonder. "Look at him," she whispered. "Dalton, look at our baby." Dalton knelt beside the bed and touched the baby's tiny hand. Impossibly small fingers wrapped around his index finger and squeezed. His son, his family, everything he had ever wanted and never thought he would have. "He's perfect," Dalton said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're perfect. You did such an amazing job. We need to name him," Sarah said. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son's face, Dalton knew. Daniel Jacob Garrett, after my brother." "Daniel," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, sweet boy, doctor." Mitchell finished his work and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. He gave instructions for care and feeding, packed up his bag, and departed with Dalton's grateful thanks and payment. Tom and Billy, who had been anxiously waiting in the bunkhouse, came up to congratulate them and peek at the baby before retreating again. Finally, late into the night, Dalton and Sarah were alone with their son. Daniel had nursed and fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. She was exhausted but glowing, her hair damp with sweat but her eyes bright with joy. Dalton lay beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at the miracle they had created. "I can't believe he's real," Dalton said softly. "I can't believe we made him." "He has your nose," Sarah observed, "and I think your chin too, poor thing." "Hey, nothing wrong with my chin. I'm teasing. I love your chin. I love everything about you." She turned her head to kiss him gently. "Thank you. For what? For finding me, for saving me, for giving me this life, this family, for making me happier than I ever dreamed possible. I should be thanking you. You're the one who changed everything. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You brought joy and love, and now this perfect little boy. You gave me a reason for everything." They lay together in the lamplight, their son sleeping peacefully between them, and Dalton thought back to that moment on the frozen trail when he had whispered those prophetic words. "I've been waiting for you." He had been waiting, even without knowing it. Waiting for Sarah, for the love they would share, for the family they would build. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and chaotic and wonderful. Daniel proved to be a demanding baby, crying frequently and sleeping in short bursts. Sarah nursed him every few hours, dark circles appearing under her eyes. Dalton helped wherever he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, taking on more of the household work so Sarah could rest. But even in their exhaustion, there was joy. Every smile, every small milestone filled them with pride. When Daniel first recognized them and reached for their faces, when he giggled at Dalton making silly expressions, when he fell asleep curled against Sarah's chest, those moments made everything worthwhile. As winter gave way to spring, they settled into a routine. Daniel grew bigger and stronger, his personality beginning to emerge. He was curious and active, always moving, always reaching for new things. Dalton built a playpen so Sarah could keep him safe while she worked, though Daniel protested loudly at being contained. "He's going to be trouble," Sarah said, watching their son try to climb out of the playpen for the 10th time. "Stubborn and determined." "Wonder where he gets that from," Dalton said with a grin. "From you, obviously." Obviously. Life on the ranch continued around Daniel's needs. Tom and Billy helped with the spring roundup again, and Sarah managed to balance motherhood with her ranch responsibilities. She wore Daniel in a sling sometimes while she worked, his head bobbing against her chest as she went about her tasks. In May, a letter arrived from California. Jacob, Dalton's brother, had finally written after more than 2 years of silence. He had struck gold, he said, and was making a fortune in the mining camps. He was also getting married to a woman named Martha and hoped Dalton might come visit sometime. Dalton read the letter to Sarah, his feelings mixed. He was happy for his brother but also hurt by the long silence. "He didn't even know I got married, doesn't know about Daniel." "Write back," Sarah encouraged. "Tell him everything. Maybe he can come visit us instead. I'd like to meet him." So Dalton wrote a long letter, filling Jacob in on everything that had happened. He wrote about finding Sarah, about their whirlwind romance and marriage, about Daniel and the ranch. He invited Jacob and his new wife to come visit whenever they wanted, said there would always be room for family. Summer brought its own challenges and rewards. The cattle thrived and Dalton was able to sell a good number at market, bringing in more money than he had seen in years. He used some of it to expand the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Sarah planted her garden, vegetables and flowers both, and it flourished under her care. Daniel took his first steps in August, wobbling across the floor into Dalton's waiting arms. They celebrated like it was a national holiday, both of them cheering and crying. Their son was growing so fast, changing every day, becoming his own little person. In September, to their surprise and delight, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. They had not been trying exactly, but they had not been preventing it either. The news filled them both with joy, though Sarah worried about managing 2 small children. "We'll figure it out," Dalton assured her. "Just like we've figured out everything else." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Sarah knew what to expect, and her body remembered the process. She continued working through the autumn months, her energy remaining good until the very end. Daniel, now walking and getting into everything, kept her busy and distracted. The second baby arrived on a warm day in late May, 1875. The labor was faster this time, only 6 hours from start to finish. Dr. Mitchell arrived in time to deliver a healthy baby girl. They named her Emma after Sarah's aunt, with the middle name Grace. Daniel, now 16 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, patting her head with his chubby hands and offering her his toys. Dalton and Sarah watched their children together and marveled at how full their lives had become. "Two babies," Sarah said one night, nursing Emma while Dalton rocked a sleepy Daniel. "2 years ago I was alone and penniless and sure my life was over. Now look at us." "Now look at us," Dalton echoed. "A family. Everything I never knew I needed." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Dalton bought more land and increased his herd. They hired additional help and built a proper bunkhouse. Sarah's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes. They added a chicken coop and began selling eggs in town. Daniel and Emma grew into active, happy children. Daniel was indeed stubborn and determined, always pushing boundaries and testing limits. Emma was quieter but equally strong-willed, with a stubborn streak that rivaled her brother's. They fought and played with equal enthusiasm, filling the house with noise and laughter. In 1877, Jacob finally visited with his wife Martha and their infant daughter. The reunion between brothers was emotional, years of separation and hurt feelings melting away in the face of shared joy. Jacob and Martha stayed for 2 weeks, and the families grew close. Before they left, Jacob promised to visit more often, to not let so much time pass without contact. As the children grew older, Dalton taught Daniel about ranching while Sarah educated both children in reading and arithmetic. They were too far from town for regular schooling, but Sarah was a patient and thorough teacher. Daniel showed an aptitude for working with animals while Emma loved books and learning. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Dalton gave Sarah a locket containing tiny portraits of both children. She cried when she opened it, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I love it. I love you. These 5 years have been the best of my life. Mine too. Every single day with you is a gift." They stood on the porch where they had sat so many evenings, watching Daniel and Emma play in the yard. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, and a warm breeze carried the scent of Sarah's flowers. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, worries about money and safety. But through it all, they had each other. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked. "When you found me?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If I had ridden a different trail that day, if I had left 5 minutes earlier or later, our whole lives would be different." "I think about it too. About how I was so sure I was going to die. And then you were there, saying those words. I've been waiting for you, like you knew somehow that we were meant to find each other." "I did know. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. We were always meant to be together." Everything that happened, all the hard things and sad things, they led us to each other. Sarah leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side the way she always had. "I was so scared that day, but also when I heard your voice, I felt peace. Like I could let go and trust that everything would be all right, and it was. It is." In 1879, Sarah became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was tired more often and the baby sat low, making movement difficult. But when their 2nd son was born in March of 1880, healthy and squalling, it was all worth it. They named him Thomas, and he proved to be the easiest of their 3 children, content and happy. Daniel was now 6 and Emma 4. They were delighted with their baby brother and helped care for him eagerly. The house that had once been too quiet was now filled with the constant noise of family life, and Dalton could not imagine it any other way. As the decade turned, their lives continued to evolve. The ranch was solidly profitable now, providing a comfortable living for their growing family. Dalton hired a foreman to help manage the day-to-day operations, giving him more time with Sarah and the children. They traveled to Cheyenne once, a big adventure for the kids, and stayed in a fancy hotel. Sarah wore a new dress Dalton had bought her, and they danced in the hotel ballroom while the children watched wide-eyed. "I never learned to dance properly," Dalton confessed as he stepped on her toes for the third time. "You're doing fine. Besides, I don't care about proper dancing. I just care about being in your arms. Always so sweet with your words. I learned from the best. You may not think you're good with words, Dalton Garrett, but you've told me you love me in 1,000 different ways over the years. In the coffee you bring me every morning, in the way you hold our children, in every moment you choose us over everything else." Dalton pulled her closer, not caring what anyone else in the ballroom thought. "You are my everything. You and the kids. I still thank God every day that I found you on that trail. And I thank God every day that you did." As their children grew, Daniel showed clear interest in taking over the ranch someday. He followed his father everywhere, learning every aspect of the business. Emma remained bookish, but also developed a talent for breeding and training horses. By age 10, she could gentle the most skittish colt with patience and kindness. Thomas, still young, seemed to have inherited Sarah's green thumb and loved helping in the garden. In 1885, they received sad news that Sarah's Aunt Emma had passed away in California. Sarah grieved for the aunt who had offered her refuge all those years ago, though they had never managed to meet in person. Emma's will left Sarah a small inheritance, money they used to expand the ranch further and establish a trust for their children's futures. "She would have loved to meet you," Sarah told Dalton. "Would have loved to see what my life became. I wish I could have thanked her properly for the offer that set everything in motion. She knows. Wherever she is, she knows you built a good life and you're happy. That's all any parent or family member wants." As the children entered their teenage years, the dynamics of family life shifted. Daniel was becoming a man, his voice deepening and his shoulders broadening. At 15, he stood as tall as Dalton and could do a full day's work without complaint. Emma, 13, was turning from child to young woman, her intelligence and independence growing stronger every day. Thomas at 10 was still more boy than man, but showing signs of the person he would become. Dalton and Sarah navigated these changes together, presenting a united front to their children while supporting each other through the challenges of raising teenagers. There were arguments and slammed doors, tears and raised voices, but also moments of joy and pride that made it all worthwhile. On a spring evening in 1890, Dalton and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had countless times before. The children were all inside, Daniel doing homework, Emma reading, Thomas playing with the new puppy they had gotten last month. 17 years had passed since that fateful day on the frozen trail. "We're getting old," Sarah observed, touching the gray streaks in her hair. "Speak for yourself." "I'm in my prime," Dalton joked, though his own hair was more gray than brown now. "Your prime? Sure. Is that why you were groaning getting out of bed this morning?" "That was the mattress." The mattress groaned. "It's a very old mattress." Sarah laughed, the sound as beautiful to Dalton as it had been 17 years ago. "I love you, you ridiculous man. I love you too. More every day if that's even possible." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. Inside, one of the children called for Sarah and she started to rise, but Dalton pulled her back down. "They can wait a minute. I want to sit here with my wife and remember how lucky I am." "Lucky? You saved my life, built this ranch with your own hands, raised 3 children. That's not luck, that's hard work. Maybe, but finding you, that was pure luck or fate or divine intervention. Whatever it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sarah kissed him softly. To me too. Every single day I'm grateful I was on that trail, grateful you found me. Grateful for every moment since. Here's to many more moments, Dalton said. Many more moments, Sarah agreed. Inside, Thomas called for his mother again, more insistently this time. Sarah laughed and stood, pulling Dalton up with her. They walked into their house, their home, filled with the sounds of their family, and Dalton felt the same sense of rightness he had felt that first night with Sarah in his arms. This was what he had been waiting for his whole life. Not just Sarah, though she was the center of it all, but this entire life they had built together. The children, the ranch, the decades of shared joy and sorrow, all of it woven together into something beautiful and lasting. As years continued to pass, their children grew into adults. Daniel married a local girl named Ruth and began building his own house on the ranch property, preparing to take over operations as Dalton gradually stepped back. Emma shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college in the East to study veterinary medicine. It was almost unheard of for a woman, but Dalton and Sarah supported her dream fully, using the inheritance from Aunt Emma to pay her tuition. Thomas showed an interest in botany and agriculture, talking about new farming techniques and crop rotation. He wanted to expand the ranch's operations beyond cattle, to include sustainable farming practices. Dalton, progressive in his thinking despite his age, encouraged this vision. In 1895, Dalton and Sarah celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting neighbors and friends from miles around. The house was full of laughter and music and love. During a quiet moment, Dalton pulled Sarah outside under the stars. 22 years, he marveled. Feels like yesterday and forever all at once. I know what you mean. Sometimes I look at our children, all grown, and I can't believe that much time has passed. But then I look at you and I see every day we've lived together written on both our faces. Eloquent as always. I try. She touched his face gently. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one. Except maybe that I didn't find you sooner, that we didn't have even more years together. We still have years ahead, Sarah said firmly. We're not done yet. I plan to grow very old with you, Dalton Garrett. To be one of those couples sitting on the porch in rocking chairs, watching our grandchildren play. Grandchildren, strange to think about. Daniel and Ruth are already talking about starting a family. We could be grandparents within the year. The thought filled Dalton with unexpected joy. Grandchildren, another generation. The family he and Sarah had built continuing to grow and thrive. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. True to Sarah's prediction, Ruth gave birth to a baby boy the following spring. They named him Dalton Jr., and when Dalton first held his grandson, he wept openly. The circle completing itself, the legacy continuing. This tiny baby would never know the loneliness and loss that had marked Dalton's early life. He would grow up surrounded by love and family, rooted in the land his grandfather had built. Emma returned from college with her degree and opened a veterinary practice in Laramie, one of the first female veterinarians in Wyoming. She remained unmarried, declaring herself perfectly happy with her career and her independence. Dalton and Sarah supported her choice, proud of their daughter's pioneering spirit. Thomas married a farmer's daughter and began experimenting with new agricultural techniques on a portion of the ranch land. His innovations proved successful, and soon other ranchers were coming to learn from him. He and his wife had twin girls, doubling the grandchild count. As Dalton and Sarah moved into their 60s, they gradually transitioned into the role of matriarch and patriarch. The ranch was now fully Daniel's to manage, though Dalton still rode out most days to check on things. Sarah spent her time in the garden and with her grandchildren, passing on her knowledge of plants and cooking and life. On their 30th anniversary in 1903, the entire family gathered for a celebration. 3 children, 3 children-in-law, 5 grandchildren, and numerous friends and neighbors filled the expanded ranch house. Someone had hired a photographer, and he captured the whole family in a formal portrait. Dalton stood in the center with Sarah, their children and grandchildren arranged around them. Looking at all these faces, all this love, he thought back to that lonely man he had been 30 years ago. That man would never have believed this future was possible. During the party, each of their children gave speeches. Daniel talked about his father's work ethic and integrity. Emma spoke about her mother's strength and intelligence. Thomas discussed the values his parents had instilled, the importance of family and hard work and kindness. When it was Dalton's turn to speak, he stood with Sarah at his side and looked out at the assembled crowd. "I'm not good with words," he began, as he always did. "Never have been. But I need to say something today. 30 years ago, I was alone. I had land and cattle, but no real life, no real purpose. And then one February day, I found someone in the snow, someone I wasn't looking for but who I'd been waiting for my whole life." He turned to Sarah, taking her hands. "You saved me just as much as I saved you that day. You brought love and joy and all of this." He gestured at their family. "Every good thing in my life came from you. Every blessing, every happy moment, every bit of meaning. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes to a cowboy who didn't know how to express what was in his heart." There was not a dry eye in the room. Sarah was crying openly, and when Dalton pulled her into his arms, everyone applauded. Their grandchildren cheered and their children embraced them, and the party continued late into the night. As they finally prepared for bed, exhausted but happy, Sarah caught Dalton's hand. "That speech, those words. For someone who claims to be bad with words, you certainly know how to touch a heart. I only speak truth. Everything I said I meant. I know. That's what makes it so powerful." She kissed him softly. 30 years and you still make my heart race. Good. I plan to keep making it race for many more years." They climbed into bed, the house finally quiet, their family settled in various rooms or departed to their own homes. Dalton pulled Sarah against his chest, her back to his front, his arms around her waist. This was how they had slept for 30 years, fitted together like puzzle pieces. "Dalton," Sarah whispered into the darkness. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had ridden a different trail that day?" "Sometimes. But I don't think I would have. I think somehow, someway, we were always meant to find each other. Maybe not on that exact trail on that exact day, but eventually. Inevitably. I believe that too. We were meant to be together, written in the stars or destined by fate or however you want to explain it. We belong together. Always have. Always will." They drifted off to sleep, these two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life of beauty and meaning. The ranch they had cultivated continued around them, their children carrying on the legacy, their grandchildren representing the future. Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations. More grandchildren arrived and then great-grandchildren. Dalton and Sarah became the pillars of not just their family but the entire community. People sought their advice on everything from ranching to marriage, respecting the wisdom that came from decades of partnership. They slowed down as age demanded, spending more time on the porch and less time in the saddle. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other only deepened. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, still whispered, "I love you," dozens of times each day. On a warm evening in June of 1910, 37 years after that fateful meeting, Dalton and Sarah sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The sun was setting in a blaze of color, and the air smelled of Sarah's roses. Dalton was 79 now, Sarah 75, but neither felt old, not in spirit. "It's been a good life," Sarah said contentedly. "The best life," Dalton agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. You remember what you said to me that day, those first words? 'I've been waiting for you, I'll never forget.' Neither will I. It was true then and it's true now. You were waiting for me and I was waiting for you, even though neither of us knew it, and when we found each other, everything made sense." Dalton squeezed her hand gently. "Everything has always made sense with you, from that first moment until now. You're my home, Sarah, my heart, my everything. And you're mine, today and always." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside the house, their family moved about, preparing dinner, settling children for bed, living the lives that Dalton and Sarah had made possible. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and loved and passed down to the next generations. This was the legacy of a cowboy who had found a woman freezing on a winter trail and recognized his destiny in her storm-gray eyes. This was the result of a leap of faith, of choosing love over loneliness, of building something beautiful together from nothing but determination and devotion. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Dalton helped Sarah to her feet and they walked inside together, his arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest, moving in perfect synchronization after nearly 4 decades of partnership. Behind them, the door closed on another day, another page in the story that had started with 5 simple words spoken in the snow: "I've been waiting for you." And in finding each other, they had found everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, joy. A life well lived together until the very end and beyond. This was their story, a testament to the power of fate and choice, of second chances and enduring love. A story that would be passed down through generations, inspiring their children's children's children to believe in the possibility of finding their own perfect match, their own destiny, their own person who had been waiting for them all along. The end.